11 kilometers beneath the storm, Finn Dalgaard knelt on the floor of his trawler and listened to something that wasn't sound. The pressure hull creaked around him. Rhythmic, structural, the kind of complaint that deep dive vessels make when the ocean leans harder than the engineering intended. But beneath the creaking, beneath the hum of the rebreather and the ping of the proximity sonar, something else registered. Not in his ears, in his bones. A vibration so low it bypassed the auditory nervous system entirely and landed in the place where instinct lives. Light came from everywhere around him and nowhere he could name. Amber, pulsing, organized in patterns that suggested language the way a heartbeat suggests intention. The rift floor stretched in every direction, a continent of darkness punctuated by those amber pinpoints, each one a biomechanical processor organism growing from the volcanic substrate like a luminous fruit from black soil. But that was 3 days from now. That was the bottom. And Finn wasn't at the bottom yet. 3 days earlier, the surface. The Bruggen platform was dying. Not metaphorically, structurally. 40 years of perpetual hurricane exposure had corroded the anchor cables, cracked the flotation cells, and fatigued the superstructure until every storm cycle brought new failures. The colony's 1,200 residents lived on borrowed engineering and the increasingly fictional promise of replacement parts. Replacement parts cost credits. Credits came from one source, biomechanical processor harvest, and the harvests had been declining for 3 seasons because the shallow fields were depleted. The easily accessible processors, the ones floating in the kelp canopy at 2 kilometers depth, had been trawled out years ago. What remained grew deeper, much deeper.
Tell Harbour Master Chen the Svalbard's rated for 8 kilometers. I've reinforced the pressure hull for 11. We're going to the rift floor.
Nobody's been to the rift floor, Finn. The Svalbard wasn't built for...
The platform won't survive another storm season without anchor cable replacement. The cables cost 800,000 credits. The shallow fields are empty. The deep fields are at 11. We go to 11.
That was Finn, third-generation fisherman, provider by blood, stubborn the way tectonic plates are stubborn. Not through effort, but through composition. His grandfather had built the first trawler on Fathom-IV. His mother had mapped the kelp canopy. Finn had expanded the harvest zone systematically, season by season, going deeper each year because the shallows couldn't sustain the colony's growth, and growth was the only alternative to decline. The descent took 7 hours. The first 2 kilometers were familiar. The kelp canopy, bioluminescent forests of alien vegetation swaying in deep currents, populated by the Pelagine and their cephalopoid civilization of color and current. Finn had trawled here for 20 years. He knew the kelp canopy the way a farmer knows soil. Sylun intercepted the Svalbard at the canopy's lower boundary. The Pelagine appeared from behind a column of luminous kelp, 2 meters of bioluminescent cephalopoid, 8 manipulator tentacles articulating complex color pulse sequences that Finn's translator rendered as musical toning.
Provider Finn, you descend past the Covenant depth. The growing fields below are not harvest, they are nursery.
With respect, Sylun, my people need what grows down there. The platform won't hold without new harvest.
The deep dwellers' children aren't yours to take. They are given when they shed. They are never taken when they grow.
The Pelagian Covenant. Finn knew it. Every fisherman knew it. For millennia before humans arrived, the Pelagian had collected only naturally shed processors, organisms that the Bathonaut released through its biological cycle, fragments of awareness no longer needed. The shed processors drifted up to the kelp canopy, and the Pelagian collected them sustainably. Humans had changed the equation. Active harvesting, mechanical extraction. Pull them from the growing fields before they're shed and you get 10 times the yield. The Pelagine called it violation. The colony accountants called it necessary. Finn called it his job. At 9 kilometers, the sonar showed the rift floor. Volcanic substrate carpeted with biomechanical processors. Thousands of them, amber luminous, pulsing in synchronized rhythms. The richest field anyone had ever mapped. At 10 kilometers, the sonar showed something beneath the field. Not geological, not biological. A return signal so massive it filled the entire display. An object, an organism, a presence embedded in the planet's crust, stretching in every direction farther than the Svalbard sonar could reach. Alive, aware, and roughly the size of a continent. Finn stared at the display and felt in his fisherman's gut the first cold recognition that the ocean he'd been harvesting wasn't empty. The first processor came free with a sound like a sigh. It was the size of Finn's forearm, an oblong organism with a crystalline exterior and organic interior, pulsing with amber bioluminescence that reminded him of a heartbeat. In the colony's processing plants, it would be cleaned, calibrated, and shipped to the Galactic Communication Consortium for integration into interstellar relay arrays. Living technology. The galaxy ran on it, and nobody asked what it felt like to be extracted from the ground where it grew. The Svalbard's trawl arms worked in sequence: extract, collect, store. Each processor pulsed amber as it left the substrate, a brilliant brief flare, then dimmed to a faint glow in the collection hold, like candles being moved from a fire to a shelf, still lit, but diminished, disconnected from whatever had been feeding them. Finn monitored yield from the cockpit. Every processor in the hold was credits toward anchor cables, toward flotation cells, toward another year of the Bregan platform staying above the waves. He counted them the way he counted everything that mattered. One more, one more, one more.
Hold capacity at 14%. At this density, we'll fill it in 9 hours. Chen, are you receiving the yield telemetry?
Receiving. Colony Council is... They're watching the numbers, Finn. Keep going.
He kept going. Below the Svalbard, the rift floor stretched into darkness, a landscape of volcanic rock and luminous processors extending beyond sensor range. The field was richer than any survey had predicted, dense enough that the trawl arms barely had to reposition between extractions. It was, by every metric that mattered to a fisherman, paradise. Sylune followed. She'd trailed the Svalbard past the kelp canopy into the deep, a dangerous descent for a Pelagine, whose bioluminescent bodies were optimized for mid-depth, not abyssal pressure. Her chromatophores had dimmed to conserve energy, and she clung to the Svalbard's hull in a way that would have looked comical if it hadn't looked desperate.
Provider Finn, watch the canopy above us. Watch what happens when you take.
Finn diverted a sensor feed to the upward array. The kelp canopy, 2 kilometers above, was visible through deep water imaging, a shimmering ceiling of bioluminescence. As he watched, a section of the canopy dimmed, not gradually, abruptly, a patch of darkness roughly proportional to the processors he'd extracted in the last hour, as though the canopy's light and the rift floor's processors shared a current that he was draining from one end.
That could be coincidental. Tidal patterns, chemical cycling.
Finn processed this the way he processed all information that contradicted his mission. He noted it, weighed it against the colony's need, and kept harvesting. The platform needed 800,000 credits. The processors in his hold represented 200,000. He wasn't at the threshold yet. At hour 6, the sonar registered the new signal. Not the massive continent-sized return from below, that had been constant since his arrival. A deep geological pulse like the planet's own heartbeat. This was different, modulated, structured, rising from the rift floor's volcanic substrate in sonar frequencies that Finn's deep dive experience told him were geological in origin, but that his gut told him sounded like speech. His translator attempted to parse the signal. 97% of the pattern matched no known communication protocol. 3% matched Pelagine color pulse syntax, the musical grammar that Sylune species used to structure meaning. As though the signal's source had learned, over millions of years of proximity, the basic building blocks of Pelagine language, and was now using those fragments to construct something addressed to the alien vessel, pulling its offspring from the substrate. The translator resolved the 3% into a single word. It arrived on Finn's display, stripped of intonation, stripped of the sonar harmonics that carried its emotional weight, rendered in plain text on a green screen in a pressurized cockpit 11 kilometers beneath an ocean that suddenly felt less like a workplace and more like a nursery.
Sylune, the sonar signal. Is that what you call the deep dweller?
The words sat on the display. Children. The trawl arms continued their rhythmic extraction. Extract, collect, store. Because Finn hadn't told them to stop, and machines don't stop for words. The sonar pulse repeated, the same word. Patient, not aggressive, not threatening, just the word, again and again, rising from the continental intelligence beneath the rift floor like a parent calling across a distance so vast that only the simplest message could survive the translation. Children, children, children. Sci-Lun told him the story in color. Not in words. The Pelagine didn't think in words. Her chromatophores pulsed in sequences that Finn's translator converted to tonal narrative, each color carrying a layer of meaning that human language could only approximate. She told him about the Covenant, and the telling took the shape of a song that had been passed through 10,000 generations of bioluminescent cephalopods living in a kelp canopy sustained by the warmth and light of something ancient beneath them. Finn listened. He heard every tonal layer, processed every metaphor, understood the ecological architecture that Sci-Lun was describing, a vertical symbiosis stretching from the rift floor to the kelp canopy, maintained for millions of years by the patient cycling of biomechanical offspring between a deep intelligence and a mid-depth civilization. And he kept harvesting. Not because he didn't understand, not because he didn't care, because 1,200 people lived on a platform that wouldn't survive the next storm season without 800,000 credits worth of processors, and understanding the suffering of an alien intelligence didn't change the engineering equations that governed whether his community lived or died.
There is a third path. Wait for the shedding cycle. Return in 3 lunar rotations. The naturally shed processors will be sufficient, not for everything your platform needs, but enough to stabilize the critical systems.
3 lunar rotations is 4 months. The anchor cables won't hold for 4 months.
The dilemma sat in the cockpit like a physical weight, the immovable object of Finn's duty grinding against the irresistible force of the Bathonauts' parenthood. Both legitimate, both real, both impossible to satisfy simultaneously. Finn's hand moved to the trawl control. The mechanical arms resumed their extraction pattern. Reach, grip, pull, store. Each processor flared amber as it left the substrate, and dimmed as it entered the hold. Each extraction sent a ripple through the sonar field, a pulse from the continental intelligence below that Finn's translator couldn't fully parse, but that his gut recognized as the same thing human parents feel when a child is carried out of reach. The Bathonaut stopped talking. The sonar signal that had been repeating that single, patient word, children, went silent. Not gradually, completely. One moment, the structured pulse patterns were filling the water column with the grief of a parent watching its offspring removed. The next, silence so total that the absence itself had the weight of a scream. Then the pressure wave. Not aggression. Finn knew aggression. He'd survived storms that tried to kill his platform and predators that tried to crack his hull. This wasn't an attack. This was convulsion. The Bathonauts' geological neural network contracted involuntarily, the way a body contracts around a wound, and the resulting pressure displacement hit the Svalbard like a wall of grief made physical. The trawler spun. Alarms screamed. Hull integrity warnings cascaded across every display. Finn was thrown against the cockpit restraints hard enough to crack a rib, and Sci-Lun was slammed against the bulkhead, her bioluminescence flaring white, the Pelagian color of shock. The pressure wave passed. The Svalbard stabilized. Hull integrity held, barely. The collection hold, reinforced for deep dive operations, had survived with its cargo intact. 600,000 credits worth of processors sat in the hold. The platform needed 800,000. Finn's ribs sent lightning through his side with every breath, and somewhere below him, something the size of a continent had just expressed grief so profound it nearly crushed a vessel designed to withstand the pressure of an ocean. If you want to see what Finn chooses when the ocean itself tells him to stop, subscribe to Void Chronicles. The answer isn't what you expect. He resumed harvesting at 0300 because the platform needed the credits. Because he was Finn Dalgaard, third generation provider, and providers provide. Because the alternative was going home and telling 1200 people that the ocean asked him to stop and he listened, and nobody was going to eat that truth when the platform collapsed. Xylun watched him from the corner of the cockpit with chromatophores that had gone gray, the Pelagian color of morning. The Svalbard surfaced into the rain at 0914, carrying the largest biomechanical processor haul in the history of Fathom-IV. 840,000 credits, 40,000 over budget, enough for the anchor cables, the flotation cells, and a surplus that would carry the colony through 2 additional storm seasons. Harbor Master Chen's face cracked into the first genuine smile Finn had seen in 18 months, and the dock workers cheered in the rain like people who'd just been told the execution was cancelled.
Finn, we can rebuild the primary anchor array. We can replace the eastern flotation bank. You saved us.
Finn nodded. The motion pulled at his cracked rib and sent a wire of pain through his side that felt, in some way he couldn't articulate, appropriate. The processors were offloaded into the colony's calibration facility, a sealed hangar where the biomechanical organisms were cleaned, tested, and prepared for shipment. Each one still carried a faint amber glow. Not dead, not alive in the way they'd been alive on the rift floor, connected to the continental neural network of their parent intelligence. Something between, residual awareness in a harvested body, like warmth lingering in a hand that no longer holds another hand. Xylun didn't surface with the Svalbard. She'd left through the emergency airlock at 4 kilometers depth, returned to the kelp canopy without a word or a color pulse. Finn hadn't tried to stop her. He'd run out of arguments that didn't sound like justification, and justification was just the word people used when they knew they'd done something that needed justifying. The first reports came in within a week. The kelp canopy's bioluminescence had diminished by a measured 31%. The dead zones weren't random. They corresponded precisely to the extraction points on the rift floor, forming a map of absence that connected surface darkness to deep-sea harvesting with mathematical precision. The Pelagian marine biologist confirmed what Xylun had said. The processors fed light upward through the water column, and each extraction severed a thread in the web. Within 2 weeks, the Pelagine withdrew from all human contact zones. Not aggressively, they simply stopped coming. The trading posts at the kelp canopy boundary, where Pelagine and human divers had exchanged information and culture for 3 generations, went dark. Literally dark. The bioluminescent markers that guided human divers through Pelagine territory were extinguished.
The Pelagine trade delegation isn't responding to communication requests. None of them. It's like they just left.
They didn't leave. They stopped talking to us. There's a difference.
The ecological reports accumulated over the following month like evidence in a trial nobody had convened. Kelp canopy degradation accelerating, filter feeder populations declining in correlation with reduced bioluminescence, deep current thermal patterns shifting as the bathynaut's metabolic output changed, the continental intelligence withdrawing heat the way a wounded animal withdraws from the hand that hurt it, not revenge. Biology, an organism recalibrating after loss. The Colony Council reviewed the reports. They commissioned the sustainability study. They discussed quotas, moratoriums, covenant compliance protocols. The language of governance applied to a situation that governance hadn't created and couldn't solve. Because the damage wasn't political, it was relational. The colony had taken something from a parent, and the ocean was responding the way oceans respond. Slowly, irreversibly, and without the comfort of negotiation. Finn turned the processor over in his hands. It weighed almost nothing. A fragment of biomechanical tissue that had once been part of a continent-sized intelligence's reproductive cycle. A child, if you defined a child as an offspring carrying fragments of parental awareness into the wider world. He'd pulled it from the substrate with mechanical arms while the parent below expressed grief through sonar pulses he'd chosen not to fully translate. The platform was saved. The colony would survive another decade. By every metric that governed Finn's identity as a provider, the mission was a success. He held the dying processor against the rain and watched its amber light pulse once, slowly, weakly, like a heartbeat winding down. Then it went dark. Not dead, technically. The biomechanical substrate would function as a processor component for years, but the awareness inside, the fragment of the bathynaut's consciousness that had been growing toward maturity on the rift floor, was gone, severed. A thought that never got to finish thinking itself. He said it quietly, to the rain, to the dark water, to the absent Pelagine and the silent Bathonaut 11 kilometers below. He'd do it again, because the platform needed saving and he was the one who saves it. Because duty was the word he'd built his entire identity around, and abandoning duty meant abandoning himself. That was the truth of it. Not that he was wrong. He knew he was wrong. Saloon had shown him. The Bathonaut had told him. The kelp canopy's fading light was drawing him a diagram. He was wrong, and he knew it. And he'd do it again anyway, because the alternative was watching 1,200 people drown. The rain fell on a saved platform, on a wounded ocean, on a world where fishermen were heroes, because nobody wanted to look at what the heroes caught. And Finn Dalgaard, provider, stood at the edge of everything he'd built and held a dead child's light in his hands, and understood that some duties don't just demand sacrifice. They demand the willingness to be the kind of person who makes the sacrifice and lives with it. The ocean was darker now. He'd done that, and he'd do it again.